It's 2020. You know what that means, kids. It's time to hustle. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Fantasy Football Hustle. Happy New Year. We've taken a few weeks off, but the hustle is back and better than ever. I am Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined as always by the analytical assassin. It is Dwain McFarlane of Establish the Run, MattWaldmanRSP.com. Football guys, you see him everywhere. Mr. McFarlane, Happy New Year. How is everything going at your house? And how was your thoughts on the Super Bowl? What happened? With our big backfield, I thought Raheem Mostert was supposed to be a top 5 pick next year, according to the masses out there.
Yeah. Shanahan will throw you, the curveball. You just never know. I think you're the guy that's really everywhere, Drake. I mean, I've seen you you're on Twitter. I see your face. I retweeted you because it was so pretty. You've got 893 views of your 24-second, little deal saying we're back, with your close up. And I think we're on Instagram, Facebook. You're hooking us up everywhere. So
we're all over the place.
We're taking over. But I was excited for the Chiefs to win, the Super Bowl. I picked the Niners as the team, that I felt just was the more complete team, but also, caveated that with, the Chiefs having the most important player by far on the field and having the very best player at that position in Patrick Mahomes, even though he didn't have a great game. But it was good to see Andy Reid get one. I was happy for him. And I was mostly happy for you, Drake, just because, Damian Williams, he should have won the MVP, just for you, just so, you could have done something, embarrassing, to me, or there could have been some sort of joke or something.
You know what? And Damian Williams looks great. So now it's going to spur another topic this offseason of where do you draft?
Here we go again. Here we go. Drake's going to draft him in the second round.
Second?
First, sorry.
Yeah, not going on the first. Are you crazy?
If you're drafting on the turn, you're taking him in the first. I got it.
If you have a top 10 pick, you better sharpen that pencil. Put Damian Williams on the board. But yeah, we are all over the place now, folks. If you're on Twitter, check us out, obviously, at FF Hustle. If you're on Instagram, if you're on Twitch, we're going to be going there this year with our videos. We're all at FF Hustle. If you're on Facebook and you get tired of all the political posts, you can go search us out at Fantasy Football Hustle Podcast, like us there, and check us out. We're really going to grow this year in terms of our video presence, YouTube and Instagram, and you're going to just see the hustle everywhere. So get used to these two mugs on your portable devices. Today we're going to talk, Dwain, about free agency. It's coming up before you know it. The next few weeks, you're going to see all sorts of guys getting cut to get teams under the cap. But we know a few guys who are free agents to be. So let's talk about them, where they might go, and how it could affect the fantasy landscape going forward. And I guess we'll start things off at the quarterback position, and no better place than with your Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott was QB2 last year in fantasy, threw for just over 4,900 yards, 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, also had 3 rushing touchdowns. Now, there's talk that he could get tagged, and the franchise tag for a quarterback is $26.8 million projected for 2020. What do you think the boys do in the next few weeks here with Mr. Prescott?
Yeah, I think just the first thing is there's no way that he won't be back, so the big thing for Dak is he'll still be a Cowboy. I think the Cowboys will get something done. I think they want to get Dak done as soon as possible so they can figure out what they want to do about Amari. And if they're not going to be able to get, Amari, are they going to tag him, or are they potentially going to do something else? I mean, the Cowboys are one of those teams that when you look at it on paper, I mean, they've got a ton of money available. They've got, projected cap space of like almost 80 million, but they've got Dak Prescott to sign, Amari Cooper to sign. Byron Jones probably going to sneak away, but then you've got Robert Quinn. So, I mean, there's just a lot of guys that, demand a lot of money. So they've got to figure out what they're going to do. And I think Dak and Amari are the two guys that they want to keep together. Cooper tailed off towards the end of this past season, but, he was playing hurt much of the season, and he's still a guy that can really do everything. So I think the goal is to keep those two guys together and then see if they can get creative with what's left and figure out how they, bring back, one or two of those other guys cheap, or, go grab, another additional piece, somewhere else, someone that's not already on the roster. But I think, Dak will be back. He's going to be a Cowboy one way or another.
That's going to be the tough part, I think, for Dallas, just talking in a general roster construction sense, is You're paying Dak. You're going to pay Amari probably. You're paying Zeke. A lot of these linemen are making money. You're paying some pass rushers now. I mean, you can't pay everybody, especially once that quarterback comes off the rookie deal. What do you think is going to fall off for Dallas?
Yeah, I mean,
They're paying guys.
they paid Zeke like 90 million for 6 years.
Too early.
Demarcus Lawrence, is like 100 million contract last year, and then Jalen Smith they re-upped for 64 million. So yeah, they've given out a lot of money over this these last what will include this offseason and the offseason before, and in some ways you can't really blame them. It's just the way these things came about. I mean, you've got young talent on your team and you're trying to keep it all together, and you've got to make some tough choices. You could argue that Jalen was a guy that they probably shouldn't have paid that much for that early.
I agree.
But DeMarcus Lawrence, I can't really argue with. This last year he was a bit dinged up. That's the going rate, for that position. But I hate to see Byron Jones get away. I like, having a corner that can do the things he can do is huge, for your scheme. It's huge for, matchups against tight ends. The guy moves all over the place. So he's going to be a huge get, for whoever gets him. He doesn't have a ton of picks, but he's a guy that you can put pretty much on the other team's number one receiver, gives you a lot of scheme flexibility. It's really going to hurt the Cowboys if they lose him. So we'll have to see what happens. But yeah, to your point, they're in a tough spot. But the good news is all the folks that they're signing are young. So, I mean, if you're going to have to pony up this money, at least it isn't to guys, that are, at the end of their second contracts. Most of these guys, now Amari Cooper is going into his 6th year, at this point, maybe it's his 7th. That guy was so young when he came in the league. I think it's his 6th year. But, these other guys, Byron Jones, Dak, even Zeke, there's a lot of debate around whether or not you pay a running back that much. A lot of the data says that you don't, but, he's still a young guy. We'll see what happens with that. But that's the positive, for the Cowboys is these guys are still young. It's not like they have a bunch of money locked up in old guys that can't do anything.
I got a team with a banner over my shoulder here who could use Byron Jones real bad.
Yeah. No, dude, there's some good players that are available. We're going to mention your Eagles here a couple of times as we go through these positions.
Another guy that's probably not going to get away is Drew Brees. I either think, Dwayne, he's going to retire or he's going to come back to the Saints. Enough of this Taysom Hill nonsense with, he's this 30-year-old who's played 11 snaps in his whole life. And I just don't see Drew Brees leaving. If he does, can they hand this team off to a Taysom Hill, Teddy Bridgewater, which they all have to re-sign Bridgewater, by the way. Mm-hmm. Would that be the move? I mean, that's not a winning formula in my mind.
I think it's all up to Drew Brees. And then once Drew Brees decides, for sure what's going to happen, I think the team is his if he wants it. The problem that the Saints have, is right now their projected cap space is $9.4 million. If you look at Drew Brees, well, what kind of contract's he going to take? He's going to be at $30 million for a year, even if you just give him a 1-year deal.
Sure.
You sign him on a 2-year deal. Maybe he gives you a little bit of a discount because he doesn't want to go play anywhere else. To your point, he wants to retire as a Saint. I fully believe that. But we've seen this, before, with quarterbacks. Whenever push comes to shove, are they willing to leave? They might. Drew Brees might be willing to leave. But I think what's going to play out is you will see Drew Brees back if he doesn't retire, and I think he will be back. But the Saints have got to figure out what to do. Who are they going to cut? Like right now, I think, I was looking on Spot Rack earlier. Like Janoris Jenkins, is getting like 10 or 11 million. He's a guy that they picked up from the Giants last year at the end of the season for their run. They could get rid of him. That gives them a little bit of leeway, but they've still got, more work to do. And they've got other guys that are due. They've got Von Bell. They've got, one of their guards, one of their lards. It was me thinking of a large human being, Andrews Pete. Yep. They've got some other guys that they've got to think about, what they want to do and how they're going to handle it. But I would see Drew Brees being back there. And if not, if he does retire, then I do actually think that you just go with Teddy Bridgewater and Taysom Hill and see what happens.
Do you think Taysom Hill could start and be a quarterback you just roll out and say, hey, Taysom Hill's our starting quarterback? For fantasy, it would be a bonanza because he runs all over the place. But I don't think you can win necessarily because I'm not sure. Yeah, I could be totally wrong. I'd like to see how he can win from the pocket.
Right.
Week out.
I have no clue. I haven't seen enough of Taysom Hill, to be honest. I know that Sean Payton really loves the guy. Every situation they've put him into, he's, come up big, but those situations are, very specific things. Now to his credit, he's come through on all of them. That's very different than being asked to be, the guy that is leading the whole team, running the whole offense. But, we have seen, the NFL is getting a bit more creative. It's looking more and more like the college game. Maybe there's some things that Sean Payton would implement into the offense that would be less Drew Brees-esque and more, along the lines of playing to the strengths of Taysom Hill that could, help accentuate or puncture, help Taysom Hill from a standpoint of doing things that, are unconventional, in an offense that are probably becoming more and more conventional after what you've seen with the Ravens and what we're seeing with some of these other teams, that are moving more to these college types of offenses. So, I don't think that's what the Saints would want to do. I think they would want to treat it more as having, two guys and see if Taysom Hill can eventually grow into that. But, I can't say for sure because I don't think we've seen enough of Taysom Hill to honestly know.
Would any team out there be able to swoop in and take Drew Brees? Like, is there any team you could look at and say, like, I think if he left, he'd go here if they paid him a boatload of dough?
Well, if you start cutting down like the boatload of dough, that starts cutting down the teams, pretty quickly. But, you could look at, could Carolina do that? They don't have a boatload, but they have money. And if they were to move on from Cam, they definitely know Drew Brees. They play from that division. They've got two young budding receivers and DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. You got a great option out of the backfield. We know how Drew Brees loves to hit those backs out of the backfield like Kamara, like he used to with Sproles. So, there could be a potential fit there stylistically. We even compared DJ Moore in a way to Michael Thomas. They're not the same size, but they both work inside. They both work in those intermediate type routes. They line up outside, but they're often working inside from the outside. So, I guess that could be, a possibility. You could see, a team like the Chargers need, that's where Brees was, and they're moving on from Phillip Rivers. I would think they're going to be aiming to go young, but maybe they want to bridge, to the future. If they take a draft pick in the first round, maybe they decide that they would be willing to do that with Drew Brees. Just thinking who else?
How about the Raiders?
I would never put it past John Gruden. I would never put it past John Gruden to go get any one of these guys, whether it be Tom Brady, Drew Brees, when I say any of these guys, or Phillip Rivers, right? Those old wily vets. John Gruden all the way back to his days, in Oakland back in the day when he had Rich Gannon, and then he brought Brad Johnson to Tampa Bay in the twilight of his career. He likes these guys that basically are like another extension of him on the field. They see everything, they understand everything. And Derek Carr just hasn't shown the capability to grow beyond being, kind of more of a rigid, I'm in this system kind of quarterback. Like, he doesn't see a lot of the other things that are going on. He doesn't unlock a lot of the vertical game. So, I could see John Gruden doing something like that. I don't know how much money Derek Carr is still owed. I don't have it up in front of me, but it seems like the Raiders have so many needs. They could spend money elsewhere. And if they are really crazy about getting a quarterback, maybe they should start thinking young.
I'm trying to look up his contract now.
The Bucks could be the other one, Drake, if they want to move on from, Jameis, which is, a possibility. Jameis is a good fit in Arians' offense, pushing the ball vertically down the field, but he turns the ball over too much. So, you have one of these other guys that could potentially come in. I don't know how good of a fit Rivers would really be at this point, with where his arm is at. I think Brady could be functional in that offense. Obviously, they would tailor it some to these guys. And I think Drew Brees could also, be functional, in that type of offense.
There's no way that they're going to go into that brand new stadium in Las Vegas and roll out there with Derek Carr. It's not happening. They're going to make a splash and get somebody in there. The guy everyone talks about is Tom Brady. He still finishes QB 12 in fantasy football. Everyone wants to write the eulogy of Tom Brady. I still think he re-signs with the Patriots and they win another championship with Tom Brady, but that's just me. They've got an interesting issue in New England because Brady, whether he's on the roster or not, is going to count against their cap. So the Patriots carry $13.5 million on the cap if Brady's contract voids March 18th. If he signs a new deal before then, $6.75 million, and then the other goes on the 2021 cap. There's issues where if he stays, if he waits till after a certain date, then the price goes way up. But I mean, there's got to be a way they bring Brady back. You can't just punt and blow this whole thing up in New England, can you? I mean, if Brady doesn't come back, and then Skarnecki just retired, and you've got no receivers. I mean, this is a bad team all of a sudden.
Right. I mean, the latest thing that we have seen with Brady is that it's not as much about the money. He's willing to take less to save money to get weapons around him. Mm-hmm. So Edelman is great in the slot. He's great. He's a great Z receiver, but he's older. You're going to have to count on him either missing time or playing through injuries. N'Keal Harry just really struggled last season with a lot of the things that actually Matt Waldman and others talked about that he would struggle with, like press coverage, and then trying to find a way to get him involved really with things that they already used Julian Edelman to do seemed to be problematic. Now, Harry didn't get on the field until later in the season. Jacoby Myers showed some flashes, but they don't really have a tight end with Gronk gone. You had Ben Watson and Matt Lacoste, and I can't remember, there's another guy that rotated through there. They didn't have anybody. So, I mean, I know we'll talk about receivers in a bit, but there's a chance Amari Cooper, gets open. I kind of doubt that, but there's a chance AJ Green gets open. And it's a very, very deep class as far as receivers, and we've seen here lately that, certain receivers in the right schemes can come in and make a difference. Now the Pats have never shown, an ability to really draft rookie receivers that can make any kind of impact ever, much less, immediately. So we'll have to see, what happens with that. For all of the things that they do really well, that's not one of them. So, I mean, you do have some field stretchers, which how well that really fits with a guy like Brady at this point in his career, I'm not sure. You've got, Perriman and Robbie Anderson, guys like that we can talk about later, but Brady wants them to sign, some players. I think the number one guy that if you could get that would really probably assure you that Tom Brady comes back is if somehow you could get Hunter Henry. Mm-hmm. Right. If you could get him away from the Chargers, maybe somehow they let him slip away, which would be probably a big mistake. That's the kind of thing you would look for with Brady. Even if you had Edelman and a Hunter Henry, and then you grabbed a Perriman to help stretch the field, or a Robbie Anderson, that might be enough, to get Brady back. And then you draft another rookie to go along with what you have, and N'Keal Harry, and then there you are. Now you've got some different playmakers to think about this season. But I think Brady wants to be back there. But I do believe that, unlike Breeze, I do think there's a bigger chance that if for some reason it doesn't work out, that Brady will go play elsewhere. I do think he's willing to do it.
I don't think there's much doubt of what's going to happen with Ryan Tannehill. We could probably move on there. He's going to get franchise tagged at worst, and he's going to get his 26.8 and go back to handing the ball off to Derrick Henry. Probably. We'll talk about him in a moment. But anything on, Ryan Tannehill, he's going to get quite the pay increase over the 4.5 he made last year.
Honestly, Tannehill, we've talked about this before. He's a guy that I didn't love him or anything, but he's a guy that I always liked. I always thought that, he was decent. And, last year he was just put into a great position. Like you said, had a great running game. You had the emergence of AJ Brown, as really, the elite wide receiver as far as rookies go. I think it's hard to argue that anyone else was, better than AJ Brown, and that was actually another guy that Matt Waldman said, if there's a guy that could be like Odell Beckham down the stretch this year, it's AJ Brown. And I remember everybody thought, what? He's a slot receiver. I mean, that just shows you what, Matt knows. He definitely nailed that one. But, AJ Brown is a guy that, he gelled really well with Tannehill. And so, I mean, I'm hoping Tannehill's back. They've got Marcus Mariota, who's also going to be a free agent, on their roster. So I'll be interested to see where guys like Mariota go. Like maybe Mariota can resurrect, his career and have a Tannehill situation if he can get in the right place. That's a guy that probably just needs a clean slate, needs a fresh start, and he could potentially be a guy that gets a chance to be a bridge for one of these young quarterbacks that'll get drafted. The problem is, if you go to somewhere like Miami, you don't really have the weapons. Tannehill landed in a spot where everything really gelled together, and he was able to really, play to his strengths. But, Tannehill really was a different quarterback last year in some ways. I mean, he was pushing the ball further down the field that he ever had in his career. He was more accurate on those throws than he had been before in his career. So, he was in a different scheme with Arthur Smith that was very play action heavy, but it was much more vertical than what he had been in the past. And he really flourished in that system. So there is a chance that if Tannehill left, if he can land in a similar type system that lets him play, to those strengths, another example would potentially be Tampa Bay. if I was in Tampa Bay, I would probably rather have Tannehill than Winston, just because, I've seen him now push the ball vertically down the field, like what, Bruce Arians wants. But at the same time, this isn't a guy that's going to turn the ball over 30 times.
If I'm Miami, there's Fitzpatrick, and we'll see what happens with, Fitzmagic, but there's also a guy out there like Andy Dalton. I think you can get him for a song to be a good bridge for whoever you draft. So I'm curious.
Andy Dalton's been a bridge for like 12 years.
Yeah, but hey, I think.
But you're right. I know
nothing.
He does more than he's done better than what people realize. It's a name when you throw it out there. If you go back and look at it, people will be surprised to see some of the finishes that he's had in fantasy.
We've kind of talked about Jameis. We've talked about Rivers. With Jameis, here's my thought, and we mentioned this before the show. I don't really care for Winston because I'm about winning in football, and I don't think you're going to win football games with Jameis Winston. And people can talk about 5,000 yards and his arm and blah, blah, blah. You turn the ball over 30 times, you're not going to win. Yeah. So
he's a great fantasy quarterback. He's a bad NFL quarterback.
Yeah, that's what it is. Give me some kid I can pay a fraction of that, and we'll see what he develops into. Rivers, I think Indianapolis would be a great fit for him because he gets to play indoors or against pretty warm weather teams, or go to a dome in Houston and play. I think he'd be fine.
I think, if the Bears are another team you hear associated with a lot of these quarterbacks as well, because Trubisky, I think everybody knows the writings on the wall. He's just, and who knows? I mean, some of these guys can turn things around, but it just hasn't been good, to this point. And I've heard Rivers' name there. I just don't see Rivers as being a quarterback that I want playing in that outdoors in the cold. Like the guy already has arm issues, and it's all about a game of anticipation. And now you add wind and all that kind of stuff. Rivers, historically has had some really tough games in the wind. Now Winston is a guy that can drive the ball, much better than a guy like Phillip Rivers, but that's not really Chicago style. Like that meant that many turnovers. I mean, I guess you could say Jay Cutler did play quarterback there, so it has happened. But Winston at least could probably play in that weather, with his arm strength. But again, you've got a team that kind of likes to rely on their defense to some extent, so far. They've got Khalil Mack there, they've got a lot of money invested in the defense. So I just don't see them wanting to bring in a quarterback that's that turnover prone, especially for that amount of money. If Winston gets somewhere between 20 and 25 million, the Bears only have 13 million available right now, and they don't really have a ton of potential cuts that they could make that's going to save them a ton of money. So they're kind of in a tough spot. I would see them potentially, honestly, I would think they might sign a guy like Mariota before they would go sign a guy like Jameis, and then just see what happens with Trubisky and Mariota. Maybe they draft a guy and see how that plays out.
Another spot for Andy Dalton. Then you can bring him in and go, hey, he's capable if Trubisky sucks. What about Cam Newton? And then we'll move on to the wide receivers. There's a lot of chatter out there. Like the GM's not too high on him. And they're saying, he's still hurt. I'll talk about him when he's healthy. And, new regime. Cam's a guy that could be on the move. He's going to command a top dollar, I'll tell you that. But this guy's a former MVP. I'm not a huge Cam guy because I just don't think he is accurate enough with the football. But, hey, he's going to go places. He's going to sell uniforms. He's going to fill your stadium and help you win a couple of games. You think he's on the move? And if so, where?
That one's a tough one. I have no clue because, it's most likely going to be a trade. And then you start looking at, the salary that's going to go with that. And some of the same things we talked about with these free agents. I could see a team like Tampa Bay. I could see them wanting to get Cam Newton. But they're going to have to know for sure that his arm's okay, especially in an Arians type offense where your quarterback's going to take hits, holding on to the ball, pushing it down the field. But that's something that Cam can do, pretty well. So I could see somewhere like that. I'm sure there's some other teams, that I'm not really thinking of right now, but again, I just want to see that Cam is healthy, and I don't think we know that. And so as far as I know, the reason that the Panthers want to move on is just because they don't think he's going to recover and they want to get out from under it and let somebody else deal with it, because of how much salary it's going to cost. So I think it's going to be tough to find the right trade partner until, he can really prove that he's healthy. And then once that's the case, I think the Panthers may change their tune. that if they really think he's also healthy, they've got a different situation on their hands.
You can tell that their owner or GM, whoever was talking today, is not a salesman, because people ask him about Cam Newton. This is an asset that you may be looking to trade in the very near future. And you're out there talking like, I don't know if he's healthy. Come talk to me when he's healthy. Blah, blah, blah. Like, you got to pump him up like, Cam's doing great. He's going to be 100%. We love him. You got to give the BS line that we hear in media all day long of, oh my God, his arm's 200%. He can throw the ball, a quarter mile. Don't come out here. I don't know. Guy's not healthy. Let me talk about when he is. You're an idiot. Come on. You're trying to move the guy. I don't know. So wide receiver, the tag, if you're a wideout, is $18.4 million, basically what we make for doing the show. And Amari Cooper tops that list. Wide receiver 10, we spoke about him at length this season. Almost 80 catches, over 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. Really solid season for the 26-year-old Cowboy. You think he gets away, or he's going to be in Big D for a while?
I don't think he's going to get away. I mean, as long as they get Dak's deal, situated. I think where it gets tough is if they can't get the deal with Dak, and for some reason they've got to put a tag on Dak, which they don't want to do because Prescott's already said, he's not going to be committed to offseason stuff. If he's going to get the tag, because then you can't use the tag on Amari, and I don't think you want to guarantee Amari's long-term money until you get Dak's contract situated, because you got to pay the quarterback first. So I think that's where it gets tricky. I think if they can. That's why I think the Cowboys really genuinely are pushing right now to try to get something done with Dak sooner rather than later, so that then they can move on Amari and either get a deal done or use the franchise tag, on him. But if for some reason the Dak thing slows down and that forces the Cowboys' hand, even though I know they don't want to do this, having just given away a first-round pick, last year to Oakland, to get Amari, that's the thing you can't forget, what the Cowboys haven't invested in Amari. But if that does happen, I mean, Amari. Honestly, quarterbacks get ranked higher because they're the most important position. But to me, Amari is, the priority free agent. You can pretty much name any team that needs a receiver, or any team that doesn't have a true 1A, because Amari, I talk about on the field application, with receivers. And so guys that can, win the ball underneath short, guys that can run after the catch, guys that can separate, guys that can work down the field. Now, Amari's not the greatest jump ball guy, but he will go up for it, when he needs to. He's elite, man. I mean, he's a great route runner. He's open, he's smart. He's battled through some injuries, which I think actually did hurt him down the stretch last season. His production fell off. He was really hot early and in the middle of the season, then just kind of tailed off. And there was just something not right about him, that they weren't really I watch all the Cowboy games, obviously being a Cowboy fan, and you could just tell the way that they were kind of protecting him with his snaps and his routes ran and all that kind of stuff. They were saving him for certain plays. So there was something going on there, but anywhere he gets free to, I mean, he's going to be, an asset. Hopefully if he leaves the Cowboys, he lands somewhere with a good quarterback, because that'll be good for fantasy.
Every year we get one of these elite older names that moves on to a new team, and it sparks the imagination of fantasy owners everywhere. This year it's going to be AJ Green. AJ Green now turns, is it right, 32 in July?
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Didn't play a snap this year, we know. Missed, I believe, 7 games last year, 6 games in 2016. Is it 2 or my handwriting's not great. I was born to be a doctor.
Well, I can't even see your handwriting, so I can't read it.
Well, this is how it's called show prep, folks. This is how you get after it. But I can't trust this guy. I don't want to give him any money. The guys, if you're a receiver and you have foot and ankle issues, sorry, I'm out. See you later. There's no way I want this guy on any kind of. I mean, he's going to get a 1-year deal, I think, with the Patriots is what's going to end up happening. But I'm not giving this dude money.
Yeah, the tricky part with Green is you're right. The injury is the big issue, but when he plays, he's really good. So like if you look at, his grade with Pro Football Focus, over the last several years, he's been 5 out of 101, 3 out of 104, 10 out of 106, and 11 out of 110 in 2018. And yeah, he's had some years where his snaps have obviously been down because of injury, but he always consistently ranks at the top.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about, a player that when you think about his application, he's a guy that can win in the possession routes. He's a guy that can win, short and still, run after the catch. Probably not as explosive as he used to be, but the plays that seem to get him in trouble are kind of his calling card. Those down the field, 50-50 jump balls where, he pretty much is just going to out jump the other guy, and win, in those scenarios. And whenever you've got the low foot or the low, the lower leg issues, you've got the feet issue, that worries me too. But at the same time, it is one of those deals where if he lands with the right offense, Drake, like if he did land with Tom Brady, these two veterans that, if they can get together early, be together through all of training camp, those two guys are going to be on the same page. They're going to come out and they're just going to tear it up for as long as AJ Green, can be on the field, because it would be two guys that really understand the game. They'd be working well together. Now, how long it will last, I don't know. But as far as thinking about the two receivers that can be true difference makers, these are the only two really that are available, which isn't a surprise. You don't see a lot of these superstar receivers, pop free. We'll see some trades from time to time. But AJ Green, and Amari Cooper, those are by far the top two. And Amari is, I would put him on a tier above AJ Green just because of the injury issues that AJ Green has dealt with. But, AJ Green's one of those guys, though, Drake. I mean, just depends on where ADP shakes out. If all of a sudden, people are discounting him to like a 6th-round pick, and he lands in the right situation with like a Tom Brady, I'll definitely be taking, a swing on him, in that round. Now, if he creeps up, into the 3rd round, that's where you got to be like, And so you just got to see how it plays out. These things surprise us every year. Guys go higher than we thought they would. And then there's guys that'll continue to slide through the whole summer that we think, wow, man, I can't believe this guy's still going, this late in drafs. We'll have to see.
Yeah. You're going to get the guy in your league who is like, oh man, AJ Green. I remember when he was great, 20 years ago, and now he's with Tom Brady. Oh my God, he's the one. And then all of a sudden he's a 3rd-round pick and he plays 5 games for you, and you're like, oh man, this stinks. My team's not making the playoffs again. He was my wide receiver 1. Well, there you go. Just pay attention as we roll out our draft plans as the summer goes along, and we'll see where it shakes out. But I'm surprised you mentioned those two guys as the 1 and 2 in wide receivers, and you didn't mention Nelson Aguilar. I mean, what kind of show are we doing here, Dwayne?
He's truly on a tier of his own. It's just, he's on an Eagles tier.
A guy who should be on an Eagles tier is Robbie Anderson from the Jets. Now, he's going to be 27 years old in May. Didn't make a whole lot of cash last year, only about $3 million. But he's super consistent. This is a guy who's going to catch 50, 60 balls for about 700-800 yards and score you anywhere from 5 to 8 touchdowns. He played with bad quarterbacks last year. You remember Darnold had mono and he was out for a while, and he's still catching balls and being pretty productive. On his career, he's almost 15 yards a catch. This is a guy who is a burner and has learned how to play receiver, can run on all the routes now, and is going to be probably overpaid, but he's going to be a really nice wide receiver find for a needy team like Philadelphia, or the Raiders, somebody like that, who needs a playmaker.
Yeah, well, the Raiders would have to get rid of Derek Carr first, right? So someone would throw deep.
Oh, that's happening.
Yeah, the thing with Robbie Anderson and the other name I'll go ahead and throw in, I'm sure we're going to talk about, but they're really similar, right? It's Brashad Perriman and Robbie Anderson as far as what they do really well, right? They're both really good deep threats. They stretch the field, and they can take the top off of the defense. And if you look at what the Eagles have done the last 2 off seasons, 2 years ago, it was Mike Wallace. He got hurt early in the season. And
I was at Disneyland when that signing happened. I was so excited. I punched Mickey in the face. I'm like, yeah, look who we got.
I was at Disneyland the following summer, I think, whenever Deshaun Jackson popped up on the injury report, which was for the whole season. But so 2 years in a row, Mike Wallace, Deshaun Jackson. Now you have a chance to get one of these 2 younger guys, that can do the same thing for you. Yeah, Perryman had issues with injuries earlier in his career, but he's been fairly healthy over the last 2 seasons. He's a guy that can give you that same, and potentially, more. He's a bigger guy. He's more rugged. And then Robbie Anderson is a guy that we know can obviously take, the top off of the defense. So I like both of those guys. Anywhere where you don't have a deep vertical threat, those are great complementary players, to consider. If you think about Perriman, he was doing this at the end of the season before with the Browns, right before he had to step up and do it this last year with the Bucks because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were both hurt, at the end of the year. So I like both of those players. And yeah, I think the Eagles will be absolutely, a great landing spot for either one of those guys.
A few other guys here nobody really cares about: Aguilar, Amendola, Cobb. The one name that might pop off to fantasy owners is Emmanuel Sanders. Now he's getting up there in age, but I think he's really productive. I think he can help a younger receiving room as a smart veteran player. Emmanuel Sanders, I think, could be a sneaky guy who won't be an early signing in free agency, but he's going to go somewhere. Again, imagine if he could go to the Patriots on a cheap deal. That'd be a great fit for Tom Brady.
Yeah, I agree. I think Emmanuel Sanders is the other guy. If you're thinking of a receiver that can truly do multiple things, I wouldn't put him in the same category as Amari Cooper and AJ Green, but he would be the next tier down. Like, obviously he's not going to win some of the jump balls those guys can do, but he can still win deep. He had a shot. He beat double coverage on that play where Jimmy G missed him, in the Super Bowl in the end zone, about a 50-yard about a 45-yard pass. So he can still do that. He's a great route runner. He understands the game. He's very, very quick. He's obviously probably lost some of his speed, but I mean, this is a guy that knows how to get open. He's always got a decent, amount of separation. If you look at next gen stats and you look at some of those things, Emmanuel Sanders is a guy that does pretty well. So I would put him as, if I'm thinking of a receiver that can do multiple things, it's Amari, then AJ Green, and then I would put, Emmanuel Sanders next. Now, if you're looking for complementary deep threats, I think Brashad Perriman and Robbie Anderson are the guys, that you would consider there.
This is the Fantasy Football Hustle. I am Brian Drake. He is Dwayne McFarland. Thanks for joining us, folks. And, we want you to check out all our new social media platforms. So if you're on Twitter, follow us at FF Hustle. If you're on Instagram, follow us at FF Hustle. You're catching a trend here, folks. If you're on Facebook, go like our page, search Fantasy Football Hustle Podcast. Same thing with YouTube. Go find us over there. We're going to grow our presence, especially on the video side of things, in 2020. And a couple of tight ends. We'll go there before we go to running back, just because my microphone's in the way, and that's how I was reading the page. So let's talk about, there's a couple of guys here, and one of them is going to get paid in New England. It's Austin Hooper, Hunter Henry. If they don't get either of those guys, maybe it's Eric Ebron. But, boy, these are two really young, productive guys. I just worry with Hunter Henry. This guy missed 6 games this season. He missed all of 2018. He missed 2 games in 2017. I'm apprehensive if I'm a GM to hand him $50 million.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what he's really going to get? I'm looking right now. I was pulling up because I wasn't for sure. I'm looking at Pro Football Focus. Their projected contract is 1 year, $9.5 million per year. So wow. If that's what goes down, I mean, he should absolutely, be, targeted by anyone that can get him. I mean, if you look at, the passer rating, for receivers and tight ends, he's the number 1 since 2016 at 133 rating, whenever he's been targeted. Number 2 is Tyler Lockett. Number 3 is Cooper Kupp. This is all courtesy of Pro Football Focus. So Henry, I can't imagine him not being, someone that the Chargers prioritize keeping, especially if they're wanting to, go young at quarterback. I just don't see how they wouldn't do that. But, he is a guy that could be available. And he is potentially a guy that if another team comes in and offers him bigger money and the Chargers are thinking, you know what, we don't want to spend that much because of the injury risk and someone else wants to take that on. That's how I think Hunter Henry ends up getting out of LA, from being a Charger, is if that scenario plays out.
And I think for tight ends, $11 million, by the way.
Yeah, so I mean, you could see that happen. And if that were to happen, yeah, I think you named the obvious one that you hear everybody say, is, the Patriots. Mm-hmm. But I mean, there's a ton of places, that you could land as a tight end. And if you think about, even just think about the playoff teams this year, Drake, all those playoff teams, how many of them had really good tight ends? And even in the season before. So, tight end is one of those positions where you can still really get really good mismatches. You can get good mismatches on running downs whenever defenses are still in their base personnel. There's so many things that you can do with a tight end still that create, advantages for your team. So Hunter Henry, honestly, if he didn't have the injury history, I would rank him, right there with Amari Cooper, even, as the two guys that you would want to land, from an offensive skill position standpoint.
Austin Hooper is another 25-year-old. Finished the season at tight end 6, missed 3 games, weeks 11 through 13. But boy, he was having a season, Dwayne. He was tight end 1 for a good chunk of 2019, ended the year 75 catches for 787 and 6. Wow. How has Atlanta not prioritized him already?
Well, I think Atlanta's history is
money, but
they have nothing. Atlanta was terrible last year, and now they only have a projected cap space of $5 million, roughly. They have some players, that they could cut, to save some of that. But yeah, I'm with you. You would think that Austin Hooper, a guy that they drafted, that they would want to keep. Hooper is not as good as Hunter Henry when it comes to working all areas of the field. A lot more of his damage has come more in the check down department, underneath stuff. So I wouldn't grade him as high as Hunter Henry, but he's definitely been healthy, and he's a young tight end. And he's still a guy, like you said, that should be prioritized. He could be a guy that I could easily see, if the Cowboys do something, different, like if for some reason they don't go with Amari, I could easily see them going after Hunter Henry or going after going after Austin Hooper, or even Eric Ebron. I don't want Eric Ebron, but he is a guy that you can move around and you can do some different things with.
That man's got a family, please.
But yeah, the Falcons are a team that, man, they're going to really be in trouble. And I think both of those tight ends, are going to be in demand. Let's just hope they don't land on some other team that has a tight end already. I hate when that crap happens. And then you have two, but like the Packers, they've got to be moving on from Jimmy Graham. They can cut him and save like $9 or $10 million, I think. The Ravens would love to have like a fifth tight end that they could line up with Drake. They'll line up with an all tight end set. The Panthers are probably moving on. They're moving on from Greg Olsen.
That's Ian Thomas time, baby. I'm stashing him everywhere.
Yeah. Ian Thomas. You've got, multiple teams, the Redskins, they need a tight end. You've got the Bengals, they're going to be moving on, from Tyler Eifert, who can never stay healthy. So, and you already mentioned the Patriots, there's plenty of teams that can use a tight end, including the teams that those two players could be set to leave. So there's going to be a great market for those guys, if either one of them is free.
Let's move over to running back, and it's, news today, so we'll talk about it. Being that Atlanta is pretty poorly run, it seems, at this point, because they had that Super Bowl run and then they paid everybody and now they have no money, because when you kick the can down the road so many years and sooner or later you got to pay the piper. So let's say Devonta Freeman gets cut, which makes no sense because last year the Lions reportedly offered you a trade for him and you turned it down, but he's a guy that could get cut. David Johnson's a guy, there's rumors that he could be cut or traded or whatnot. I don't know how that happens with his ballooning contract, but they're two guys who make this running back pool a lot more enticing. So before I get into the other guys, what do you think of those two possible cuts and where we'd like to see them go?
Yeah, I don't know how the cap would work on those two specifically, but David Johnson just didn't look very good. No. He just looked, especially after the injury. So how much of that is injury, we don't know. But when you compared what you saw with Kenyon Drake on the field versus David Johnson, it literally looked like, you had, one super old person and then you had somebody really young and fast. And, David Johnson wasn't the latter. Kenyon Drake would have been the one that looked that way. So, if I'm the Cardinals, I'm just trying to bring Kenyon Drake back and, and draft a guy, and just call my backfield set. So
Chase Edmonds is still there too, right?
Yeah. And you have Chase Edmonds. So, I don't think the Cardinals want to keep David Johnson. So if they can get rid of him, I'm sure they would. Devonta Freeman, again, it's another guy that, just recently got a big contract and is part of why, beyond the fact that running backs don't contribute as much to the bottom line when it comes to winning, and are more easily replaceable, based on the data that's available. These are guys that they're just, they got their money and, they've been injured. And so all of these guys, think about it. David Johnson's been injured. Todd Gurley's been injured. Devonta Freeman's been injured. The list goes on and on and on. So yeah, I don't know how much somebody's going to invest in those guys, but I think both, especially Freeman. I think Freeman still has something left in the tank. David Johnson, it was tougher to tell. I would need to go back and watch really what he looked like at the beginning of the season. What's stuck in my head right now, Drake, is those games he came back and played after he was injured. So I don't know how much he has, to give versus what we saw from guys like Derrick Henry, Melvin Gordon, Kenyon Drake, who we talked about. Your boy Jordan Howard from the Eagles will probably be out there. So, I think clearly those guys we probably would project as being, healthier and having a little bit more available. And, they're available on the market versus the other guys that still have contracts.
The tag for running backs this coming year is going to be $12.4 million. Derrick Henry, who finished his RB5, 1,540 yards, 16 touchdowns, caught 18 passes and a couple of scores there too. Everyone's going to remember what Derrick Henry did in the playoffs. And when it comes to draft season, I'm curious where people are going to rank him. I'm sure people are going to say, oh, you got to take him in the top 3 because of just recency bias. Remember what he did. But I mean, this is a guy who wasn't making any money. He's going to get 300 touches again on a team that doesn't want to throw the ball. How long until this guy breaks down and then you're sitting here with this $40 million running back standing on your sidelines who doesn't play on passing downs?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about Derrick Henry is he still hasn't been overused. The guy, his utilization has still been lower than when you look at guys like Zeke, right? And the amount of workload that they've taken. Now, Zeke missed some time, with the suspension that he dealt with, but Henry is a guy that, he just hasn't been used as much. So, I mean, in one way you could look at that as being a positive. Now, it's like what you said, a guy that doesn't really work in the passing game, although when you just throw it to him in the flat, no cornerback can tackle him. It's funny. I feel like of his 18 catches, I'd have to go look, but each year, at least one of those is like an 80-yard score where he just runs past the corner who wants nothing to do with him. So it'll be interesting because I do think that, the list of players that I just mentioned, that's really in these GMs' minds, right? Thinking about, even what you saw with Zeke last year, not being able to break big plays, for the Cowboys, and then Todd Gurley, and then Devonta Freeman, and then David Johnson. I mean, when's the last time we've seen a running back get big money and it pay off, right? I honestly, I would rather
Emmitt Smith.
Yeah, and that was way back in the day, exactly, right? I mean, but if I'm looking at Derrick Henry, the other thing I'm thinking about is I just want to see where he lands. I think Tennessee is the most likely landing spot, for him because of what he did for them last year. If they can get to the right deal with him, and he and Tannehill are so complimentary. But the thing when I think about Derrick Henry and I think about next year's draft, even if he's with the Titans, I think people forget that what can swing Derrick Henry so far one way or the other is whether or not, the Titans are in close games or if they're really trailing. If all of a sudden these game scripts, and you know how the ball can bounce, Drake, it just bounces a little bit differently. And all of a sudden your whole season goes from, oh, we were leading, 35% of the time and we were, close to being tied another 20%, and trailing X percent. All of a sudden, just a few different things can happen. And all of a sudden, the game scripts totally change for these guys. And that's the thing that would still scare me about Derrick Henry. His ability on the field doesn't scare me. The way that they want to use him doesn't scare me, but it's just one of those really fine line situations where I feel like everything still has to go well for the game script to stay in play because of his lack of usage in the passing game. I just prefer the guys I know that are going to stay on the field. Now, if Derrick Henry somehow could get that going for him, then he'd be great. I'd have no issues, with him whatsoever. That's just not a facet of his game that we've really seen him, really be able to, show off at any point. So I don't know what Deion Lewis's, contract status looks like. He hardly does anything on the team, even though he gets on the field. People don't realize how much the guy still gets on the field.
AFC whenever game, he was the guy on the field when they're trying to come back and win that game in the fourth quarter.
And that's the exact point, right? If all of a sudden the Titans are in more games like that, and you know how these teams are that play this style, Drake. Look, the Panthers did it every year under Ron Rivera. One year they'd be 10-6, the next year they'd be 7-9. What changed? The way the ball bounced.
Exactly.
It's a tight margin type of game they're playing. Now, I do like what the coordinator Arthur Smith did with them last year. Play action really worked well. He got a lot out of Ryan Tannehill. I do like some of the other weapons there, like we talked about A.J. Brown earlier. So Derrick Henry is a guy where, it's probably best that he land in Tennessee, but even then, you're still going to have some things you're going to have to think about, before you're willing to pull the trigger on him. I do think Derrick Henry is one of those guys, Drake, that people will get super pumped up about because they'll go back over all the things we already know. They'll be like, oh, he's 6'3", 240 pounds, and he runs this 40. And we're all like, yeah, he's had that since he got in the league. But, people get excited about those measurables. And it's just, I could see that being a narrative that people, jump onto. And like you said, what he did, not just in the playoffs, really down the fantasy stretch. I don't have all of my data pulled up in front of me, but dude, his points were nuts. He was putting up 25 and 30 points like it was nothing over and over and over. And it can happen, but you just got to realize the downside with it. So, I think he's a guy that I'm definitely not taking in the first round. It depends on how everything shakes out. He may be a guy at the end of the second, right? That you start thinking about if he's there.
He's going top 7 in drafts next year.
He probably will. We'll see.
There's going to be a point where there's going to be some fan sitting in whatever they call that stadium now in Nashville, and they're just going to zoom in on him as the 7-9 season closes in, and the guy's going to be thinking like, "Oh my God, we gave Ryan Tannehill $60 million, and we're paying $12 million a year now to Derrick Henry, and we're 7-9, and we can't, complete a pass to AJ Brown, who's going to leave as soon as his deal's up in 4 years." But I digress. Melvin Gordon didn't play in the first 4 weeks of the season. That was the whole big talk of draft season, is what's going on with Melvin Gordon. He's 27 years old now. Still finishes RB23. He is different than Henry. He actually is pretty good out of the backfield. Caught 42 balls. I mean, the guy missed 4 weeks and still caught 42 balls for almost 300 yards. That's with an Austin Eckler on his team, and ran for over 600 yards and 8 scores. I think there'll be a market for him. I don't think it'll be as robust as he wants it to be. But again, it's kind of a luxury item at this point. Like, you could just go draft the kid out of LSU who does the exact same thing for nothing, instead of paying Melvin Gordon. But he's going to get paid. It won't be with the Chargers. I can't imagine that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and obviously I think, Melvin Gordon already learned, last year that, he's not going to get what he thought he was going to get, in the market. So I do agree with you, though. What I like about Gordon, is that he is actually a good receiver out of the backfield. He can actually work a little bit downfield as well, something that we've talked about in the past. It doesn't just have to be a swing pass. He's pretty good in that area. So he's a guy that, you hear a lot of people talk, he's a slightly above average, above replacement running back. So he's not someone, that is he going to, change the whole dynamic of your team from a football standpoint? No, but from a fantasy standpoint, he's a guy that, can stay on the field as long as he's healthy. That's really been his bigger issue, right? Is that he's just not been able to stay healthy. So I could see, Melvin Gordon, I get a little bit more excited about him than Derrick Henry, not because I think he's more talented, just because I do think, to your point, he's a guy that can stay on the field a little bit more. Now, it just depends on, where does he land? All these people love these two-headed backfields. I mean, so there's so many places he could land, Drake, that if he lands there, even though he may have, 3-down back ability, he's not going to be on the field, for all 3 downs because they've got other guys. I mean, if you think about the league right now, most teams have a decent runner. I mean, think about it. Think of all the teams and just start naming them, in your head, and think of all the teams that really don't have any running backs. There's not really that many. Most teams have something at this point. We've really kind of been restocked at that position through the drafts over the last 5 or 6 years. And so there's not a ton of landing spots that are really juicy for him. There's situations that could turn out to be really good if an injury strikes, at another position. I mean, what he could land with the Bucks, he could take that job and run with it, but they need to sign like 5 linemen, to make it worth it.
Yeah. I think obviously Miami needs everything.
Yeah, but you don't want anybody on Miami. No. Yeah, Houston would work. Yeah, I mean, if you get, they're going to let Lamar Miller go, but the thing is, if they keep Duke Johnson, then that's a pain in the butt.
Yeah,
because they're going to use Duke Johnson on the passing downs, and then Melvin Gordon is just Carlos Hyde. So That's the thing I think about.
Yeah.
Potentially the Cardinals if
That's
they
what I was
let
gonna
Kenyon
say,
Drake
yep.
and David Johnson go, but that's a lot of things that have to happen.
If
You
Derrick Henry
know,
leaves Tennessee, there's an opening for you.
yeah. I mean,
Although
actually,
why would you pay, one and not the other? But
well, I mean, it's, if somebody else pays Derrick Henry, a lot, and you could still get Melvin Gordon for less,
mhm.
yeah. I mean, then that works. But I mean, if it's just, as I look at all these teams, there's really not a ton of
Yeah.
places you could go land. I mean, at the Colts, you still got Marlon Mack, and I'm talking about teams that have money. Miami, yeah, he could be the main guy, but if I'm the Dolphins and I just blew everything up, the last thing I want to go spend money on is a running back. I want to restock and spend money on, other positions and spend as little as possible, on the running back position. The Bills have Devin Singletary. I'm looking at teams that have money, the Broncos. They're not going to do. I just don't see anything, there. They've already got two runners.
You know
With
where he's going to
Phillip.
go, and it's going to screw everybody in fantasy. And when it comes across Twitter, Detroit.
That's
you go,
actually one you
damn
could
it.
see because Carry On, has struggled to stay healthy 2 years in a row.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, then that's going to suck too because you got
Yep.
Patricia. We know you got the 3 running back thing. So yeah, I mean, I'm just looking through this, and without some other cuts or things shaking out, it's not like there's a ton of places for Gordon to go. Really, what this is just a boon for Austin Eckler,
Mm-hmm.
and Justin Jackson obviously
yeah.
would take on a bigger role. Who knows? They'll draft somebody if Melvin Gordon's gone. So, but just as I think through all these places, it's hard to find a place. I mean, like the Bengals have Mixon now, the Eagles have Miles Sanders, the Redskins maybe because Adrian Peterson's old, and then you've got Darius Geis who hasn't been able to stay healthy. But if Geis is healthy, they want him to play. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just it's not a real clear cut situation to where you're like, ooh, that's the team to go to. The only one I can see right now is the Bucks. I guess you could say the Chiefs. But they don't really have any money. They got 13.7 million.
They got Damian Williams. They're
I know,
set.
I know, but
Please.
I had to work that in there. The 49ers aren't going to pay a running back. They just, they got a guy out of the stands, and he averaged 5 yards per carry. So it's just kind of a tough market, from a standpoint of, teams not wanting to pay these positions and everybody already having backs. The Steelers don't have any money. They could be a potential team just because James Conner's hurt, all the time. But I just
draft somebody.
Yeah, I just don't see where he's going to land that we're just going to be like, oh, great, that's awesome, unless it's the Bucks, and then we need to see the Bucks sign like 3 offensive linemen.
Pretty much. Anything else going on out there? Any other players? Anybody on defense? It's kind of piquing your fancy here before we.
If we're talking fantasy, I think you've got to talk about the Redskins guard Brandon Scherf. He's had injury issues, but this is a guy that played really well. For the 2 seasons before the last 2, whenever he's been, in and out of the lineup, or actually he had season-ending injuries. So he's really good. You've got, I believe Joe Thuney from, the Patriots is available. So he's decent. And then if you look at, from a tackle standpoint, I want to say it's Jack Conklin from Tennessee, who's a good run blocker, not as good in pass protection. And then Anthony Costanzo, if he doesn't, I know he's talked about retiring here recently in the past, but there's some decent offensive linemen, available. So some of these teams that have money, I know I've mentioned the Bucks, multiple times, but they also happen to be one of the teams that have money. They're projected to have almost 80 million in cap space. I mean, they could easily target 2 of those linemen. And that would be, if they get them together, keep them healthy, keep them through camp, by week 5, 6, these guys could really be, gelling. And that could be huge for whoever the running back is, whoever the new quarterback is, because we know they've got the other weapons. And
spend your money on the line, draft a quarterback, draft a running back. Spend
maybe
everywhere else.
And maybe OJ Howard wouldn't have to block every play.
Yeah, right.
Maybe you could get your first round pick into a route more than like 60% of the time during a game. And then you imagine teams just really having to defend Godwin, Evans, and OJ Howard all the time.
Andy Dalton, MVP of the league, Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2020. Calling it right here. I called the LaShawn McCoy to Kansas City. I'm calling Andy Dalton to Tampa Bay.
You do make some big calls, man. So I mean, I'm not going to argue with you.
Tell my wife that.
So I mean, the offensive linemen, there are some good defenders and stuff, but I know we're already pushing on an hour. I mean, but there's some pretty solid cornerbacks. There's some good safeties. So we'll see what happens, and we can come back and we'll talk about this stuff more. I know the main thing people want to hear about right now are the skill position guys. So I think we've covered most of those. I'm sure there's a few kind of unheralded guys that we didn't really talk about much, but I think we hit most of them.
Yeah, and what you guys can expect from us in the off season here is I'm sure we'll get someone to come on and talk about the draft and the prospects. Hopefully our friend Matt Waldman, who does it better than anyone. We'll talk a little dynasty football. We got a lot of guys who are clamoring to be guests on the Hustle, which is a good thing. People want to come and talk to our audience. So we're going to bring the best and brightest to you. We're going to have coaching changes, which if you remember last year, before anybody was talking about Chris Godwin, Mr. McFarland called it right out when Bruce Arians was hired. He goes, oh, well, he's going to play the big slot role and he's going to dominate and have a great year, so draft him. And guess what happened? So, see, you get something right yourself there. And then
I try, Greg. Hey, the one guy I will say, we mentioned him, but the guy that I would target at runner, is Kenyon Drake. Look what he did, with the Cardinals down the stretch, 122 attempts, 8 of them for over 15 yards. I'm a sucker for the 15 plus yard, those guys that can do that consistently. He's good out of the backfield as a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny what happens to some of these guys when they get out from under Adam Gase. It's crazy. But, the Cardinals, what they were able to do, spreading defenses out with that, running game, Kenyon Drake was really good. And he's a guy that can be more in the mold of an Alvin Kamara, some of these other guys,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say he's as good as Kamara and Christian McCaffrey because he's not, but he's more in their vein, right? He's a guy that can run routes out of the backfield. He can run routes downfield. And he's really just now maturing, as a running back, and I know he had a lot of negative plays one year and supposedly that's what Gase didn't like, because he took too many negative plays. But he may be ironing, some of those kinks out. And he's a guy that's definitely explosive. He's got plenty of tread left on the tires. He wasn't used that much at Alabama. He wasn't used that much in Miami. He got some decent work last year down the stretch in Arizona, and he did really well, man. So, I mean, Kenyon, he's the guy that'll be the cheapest of all those. And he probably, he might be the most explosive. Obviously, Derrick Henry, is very explosive with the ball, in his hands, in a different kind of way. But Drake is a guy that, could end up being a very versatile weapon, for somebody. I kind of hope to see him back with the Cardinals and see, David Johnson, move along. I think that would be the best thing for Drake, but we'll see.
There you go, folks. We appreciate you hanging out with us here. If you like the show on YouTube, please subscribe and check us out on Instagram at FF Hustle and everywhere you find us. And if you're listening on the podcast, there's only one place to find us on the podcast, and that is through the feed that we are tweeting out. Dwayne and I will put that out there. It's through fightingchancefantasy.com. You can go over to fightingchancefantasy.com/podcasts, catch us over there. So just make sure that your link is queued into us. I know we had a couple of different places you could find us last year, but in 2020, it's all one uniform link. So Dwayne, that'll wrap it up, my friend. Good stuff, man.
Yeah, one last thing for you, Drake. I mean, where does Frank Gore land? I know you can't wait.
Somewhere to screw me. No question about it. This is what'll end up happening. I'll end up getting like the number 1 pick in my, home league draft. He'll end up as the backup in Carolina. And then I'll take McCaffrey, and then they're going to, what, with this new stuff, we want to get Frank Gore the ball and take some wear off McCaffrey. Who knows? But, well, thanks, folks. We appreciate it. We'll be back probably talking some coaching changes next time. And thanks, folks. And never stop hustling. And we know it's January, February, soon to be March, but the hustle never stops in fantasy football. We'll see you next time. Thanks.